The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen only.
Okay, you can see slides okay? They're ready?
Ready to go, and I'm
Okay.
recording. So, hey,
Okay.
Welcome to the North Central U.S. Climate and Drought Outlook for April of 2022. My name is Doug Cluck. I work for NOAA, and today we're going to listen to Dr. Dennis Toddy from the USDA Midwest Climate Hub do our presentation for the month. And we'll just take it away, Dennis. How about that? Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Doug. Great to be here. Seems like I always do this around the spring, around April. There's always a lot to talk about, so let's get right at this. Plenty of things to address and things that are impacting us all. Just a reminder of the partners that we have involved in this, many who are actively involved and some who are behind the scenes sharing information and creating products. Just a reminder that our next webinar is May 19th, 2022 with Dr. Aaron Wilson from the Ohio State Climate Office and OSU Extension. And a reminder, you can catch these, the recorded webinars at the Midwest and High Plains Regional Climate Centers. Okay, get on to our agenda for today. As usual, touch on current conditions, some various impacts across the region and various aspects of that, and then touch on outlooks for La Niña and what we're seeing with the summer. Picture here just showing not a typical spring day, a spring Easter day like you like to see, actually snow on Easter Sunday. Okay, let's go back and take a look at past conditions, kind of give us a context for where we are going ahead. First, we look back at March, rankings nationally by state for March temperature. And basically, half of our region was in the above average category. The pink peach color, whatever it is, meant that the month of March was above average for temperatures. And for most of the eastern part of our region, western part of our area was near average. None of the rankings too out of whack, but you know, compared to what we've seen some recently, this was a little bit of a surprise with the above average temperatures. There has been some more cold recently and far this year, but we'll talk about that as we go along. Touching on March precipitation, much more variable situation and something that we're going to talk about frequently as we go along, kind of wetter to the east and drier to the west. So March precipitation rankings, the higher the numbers were wet on the wetter side. So Wisconsin and Michigan, you can see at 120 and 121 are in the much above average category, top 10 wettest, which was good for parts of those states that were actually running somewhat dry. Wetter, but not as extreme areas to the south and west of there. And then the plains area of our region, in North Dakota in the top 10 driest at number 7, and then some drier areas around it, though not quite as severe. Now jumping to the January through March, the 3-month period we're looking at here, a bit less to talk about overall from January through March in the way of temperatures. Minnesota and Wisconsin were in the light blue there on the cooler side, below average in the way of temperatures. Otherwise, lots of near average, kind of balanced out with some early cool and some latter warmth that we saw in March, so it evened things out. And then overall, Montana and Wyoming on the warmer side. Again, not too extreme, but on the warm side out there. Precipitation, again, is where the things look a lot different. Again, that eastern wet area, so Missouri up the Ohio Valley into the Great Lakes, all on the above average side. While we look to the west, a number of states, 3 states in the top 10 driest, Wyoming, Nebraska, and South Dakota, and South Dakota coming in at number 2 in the January through March period. Very important situation out there because as we're getting into this time of year, this is the part of winter we don't expect a lot of precipitation, but snow is beneficial. And as we get into springtime particularly, we expect to have more precipitation. It's a very important time of year for rangeland, for getting some water on the surface. So if we're not getting that, we're presetting ourselves for drought conditions and continuation of drought conditions, which we're going to talk about as we go along here. And then just to look further west, Nevada and California, driest January through March on record. Since we're nearer the end of the month, the latest as we will ever do these in the month on the 21st, we'll check the last 30 days to get kind of an update. Precipitation wise, again, our scale, anything that is in red to brown is on the dry side, and it's in the up to the blue to purple is on the wet side. Total precipitation, upper left-hand side, percent of normal, percent of average precipitation, lower right-hand side. Not a great deal of precipitation, especially in an area from South Dakota down to western Kansas, where we've had less than a ½ inch of precipitation and less than 5% of average precipitation overall in some of that region. Extends somewhat into Iowa, but not quite as bad. Surrounding that, North Dakota around to the Great Lakes and over to Illinois and Missouri, above average precipitation. Up on the northern areas, over double average precipitation. Some of that was with this last system in North Dakota. Other ones were just some repeated systems more recently. And then these wetter areas further south, not necessarily big events per se, but lots of small events. Local folks were commenting on just lots of repeated weak events, limited events. From a temperature standpoint, much colder than average throughout much of the region. The blue area is in the 4 to 6 degrees below average, with a few spots of purple, even worse than that, surrounded by lots of 2 to 4 degrees below average over the last 30 days. This has created a big impact for a number of different things throughout the region. We'll talk about as we go along here, but generally colder and kind of at odds compared to what we saw in March, where we saw quite a bit of a warm above average when we looked at our numbers around the states. Okay, that sets our stage. We're going to go on and talk about some specific issues and events here. The first of those we're going to hint at, we'll get to later, is the blizzard that hit North Dakota. Here's a picture of some livestock from the National Weather Service in Bismarck, shared with the National Weather Service in Bismarck, of some of the livestock that were impacted by this blizzard. We'll talk more about that as we go along. First, lots of discussion, lots of questions about wind. Lots of questions about it seeming very windy. First thing to point out, especially April, is climatologically in the plains, central U.S., our windiest time of year. It's a time, when things are transitioning between winter and summer. It's a time we have lots of pressure gradients. We are typically windy no matter what. But we have been seemingly windier than average. So this is a graphic. Some graphics we've not shown you before. It's from the National Center's, NCEI, but this still says NCDC. It's a NOAA product, and is 10-meter wind speed, which is a standard height of an anemometer at airports. It's about 31 feet off the ground. And the difference of those average winds for each month compared to the 91 to 2020 average winds. So January in the upper left-hand side. This is January 2022 compared to that long-term mean. February on the right-hand side, March on the lower left-hand side. And the scale on these is in meters per second, difference from average in meters per second. You'll see the numbers are relatively small. Just to get your bearings, a meter per second is about 2.2 miles per hour. So each meter per second is about 2.2 miles per hour different from the long-term average. Now these numbers again are small, up to maybe 2 in some cases. And you might say, well, what's the big deal here? Wind, when you compare from the same month in multiple years, you don't compare April to July because there's difference in wind conditions there. If you compare them from year to year, there's not a great deal of variability. The averages come fairly close together. So when you start getting a few miles per hour different from one year and month to the next one, these seem a bit out of the ordinary. It's been pretty clear that we are windier than average. Exactly how we quantify that, we'll talk more about that here. But the plains particularly, and throughout the whole central U.S. here in March, we have been windier than average. Now, we don't have as well-developed wind climatologies. There's multiple reasons for that. There's some different heights for different purposes of wind being measured. Period of length, how long we've been measuring, and how we measure wind has differed across some areas. There's also another issue with when you're trying to average, we can average wind speeds, but then you have gusts and average speed, and there's also wind direction. Trying to incorporate wind direction into this gets a little bit confusing. So there's more coming, but we wanted to touch on this a little bit since there's been so much question about this. A few of the details about wind from more locally: Sioux Falls National Weather Service in 2022 has had 8 days of 50-mile-per-hour gusts and 10 days of 40-mile-per-hour gusts. Sioux Falls is a fairly windy place to begin with, but this is even on the high side of that. April 4 through 7 in Colorado was one of the top 5 windiest periods since 1992, according to some data from Colorado, and seems to be a high number of wind advisories because of strong winds, leading to the blowing dust that you see from Colorado down below. Okay, jumping to a specific event, the Plains Blizzard of 12th to the 14th of April. The graphic on the bottom shows the area impacted and the amount of snowfall related to this. This was a maybe not quite one for the record books because there are some similarities to some other storms, but this is a very large, very significant event. So the scale is on the right-hand side here of snowfall. Most of the state is in the category of at least 6 inches of snowfall. Much of the western part of the state is in the 18 plus, and the darkest areas are upwards of 3 feet of snow. Again, with the wind, we had winds over 60 miles per hour. It is a bit difficult to measure sometimes, so we have huge piles in other areas, less in other areas that are more windswept, but a very impactful, very large blizzard event. Some of the issues related to this, I mentioned the wind. Minot Airport set the peak at 63 miles per hour, but plenty of other 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Picture on the left from North Dakota Department of Transportation of being out on I-94 being closed. Basically, North Dakota shut down the state for a couple days during this because it was almost impossible to keep things open. Picture in the upper left-hand side of a rancher carrying a calf. This is a common time of year for calving and lambing, and so that is a risk. We know that there have been some losses. So far, the numbers haven't been too serious, but the numbers are still being collected. So trying to get a handle on the seriousness of this event. The water from this will help because this was a very dry area. And on the Drought Monitor, we'll show you here in a little bit. In fact, we could see a little bit of flooding in some places depending on how this plays out. But the water will be beneficial despite the downsides that we saw with this. From an overall severe weather season, we're talking about tornadoes, hail, and wind. This has been an early start to the severe weather season. We typically don't talk about these, but just giving you some climate context. The dots on the right-hand side are the events that have been noted so far this year. Iowa has already seen tornadoes and deaths, and other states around have seen tornadoes and some other injuries. The Minnesota folks noted that I-35 was closed for a period of time because of overturned semis. If you look further to the west out in the plains, it's been much quieter so far. I noted earlier that there's been a lack of precipitation. If you don't have much precipitation, there's probably not many storms, and you need to have storms to have severe weather. So an earlier start in the eastern areas, and further in the plains, not too much happening in the way of severe weather so far. Okay, jumping to some more specific, we're going to go to hydrologic impacts. Showing one of the issues of the remnants of a lake, Ellsworth Lake in Kansas, thanks to Chip Redmond from Kansas State for sharing this image. Touching on 7-day average stream flow, again, the bluer to black areas are above average stream flow. So some areas up in northern Wisconsin above average with some snow melting up there. And then southern Missouri up part of the Ohio Valley with some of the wetter areas in that region. Northern parts of the eastern Corn Belt, middle of the distribution, and then from Iowa out into the plains, lots of brown, tan and brown, indicating below average stream flows. Not much snow in these areas. Drought going back to last year, so we probably have some deeper groundwater, lack of deeper groundwater that's leading to lower stream flows. So this whole combination is kind of showing the overall impacts in some of our regions. Another part, soil moisture. A couple different soil moisture models. Up in the upper left-hand side is one version. It's a few days earlier. It's dated from the 15th. And then the lower right-hand side, one that's as of yesterday. Look for similarities and differences. There's some common similarities. That area from Iowa, Central Plains and south, very dry soils. A little bit of differences in the Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois area. Eastern Corn Belt, some green, so likely wetter. That's a common thing we've been talking about. And then some wetter in the Northern Plains and some drier, kind of mixed from place to place. And you compare these to what is coming from the USDA NASS reporters. These are people in the field reporting what the soil moisture is looking like, the percent short to very short. The top number is the percent as of the 17th, and then the bottom number is different from last year. So in the plains, lots of brown, high numbers of short to very short. Eastern Corn Belt, not very much short to very short because of wetter conditions. From a snow standpoint, that's leading to some of our western rivers and water resources, looking at what's going on in the way of snow. Snow water equivalent from runoff areas into the Missouri and the Platte. Northern areas that go into the Platte, northern areas that go into the Missouri. Yellow areas 70 to 90%, so a decent amount below average. Blue areas further north that were impacted by this most recent blizzard. The milk up here looking at 600% of average of snow at this time of year. One, they did have a lot of snow. Two, the amount of snow on the ground we compare to from historically tends to fall off this time of year, so you can get some inflated numbers. So we did have quite a bit of snowfall, but from a percentage standpoint, it looks much larger maybe than it might have otherwise. Going down to the areas running off into part of the Platte, they get in the green, so we're closer to average, but still a little bit low average. And then eastern Wyoming, where it goes into to South Dakota, quite a bit lower in that area. So we don't have a great deal of snow to run off into the river systems. We'll touch on that here as we go along. Just a few specific things. On the Missouri River main stem reservoirs, they're 10 to 12 feet below the conservation pool, which indicates their storage is reduced. So the Corps is going to provide minimum service for navigation this year, provide some navigation, but more limited. Bureau of Reclamation reservoirs in the west are in fair shape, maybe not well above average, but okay. The Ohio River is kind of back to usual conditions, a little higher, but nothing outstanding. And then there is overall a lack of surface water for livestock in the west. Not a river so much, but an impact on agriculture. Surface water is used to feed livestock or for water for livestock that are out in rangeland areas. Need to increase the runoff to help produce runoff in ponds and dugouts for them to access. Touching on the Missouri River system, where we are from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The red line is the average, the 1981 to 2010 average, and then a couple comparisons on the high side, and then 2001 on the low side. We were a decent amount below average. The blue is this year. We've dropped off recently to be close to that 2001 comparison, and that's not a good comparison situation to be in. Right now, Fort Peck to Garrison is about 86% of average, and the total above Fort Peck is 84%. On the Platte, things are a little bit better, compared. Overall, we were a little bit below average in the North Platte and the South Platte. We've fallen off a bit more recently with some of the melt off of snow. Touching on the Great Lakes, just to check in on lake temperatures and the amount of ice cover. Current amount of ice cover in the Great Lakes is about 3.2%. Time of year where most of the ice is starting to go out. Shipping can start. Lake temperatures are still quite cool, except for some of the near shore areas further south where we're getting up into the 40s overall, lots of 30s in the way of temperatures. Great Lakes levels these are graphics from the Army Corps of Engineers also showing where the different lakes are: Superior, Michigan Huron, St. Clair, and Erie, showing the distribution of them. The black line is where we are right now. The middle dots are the long-term average. Superior is a little bit below. We fall off quite a bit from the very high levels we had more recently. Whereas the other three lakes are still running above the long-term average, a bit higher. And then we are expecting them to recover a bit, as they do this time of year, with more rains and some runoff from snowmelt. Okay, getting us back around to the U.S. Drought Monitor, a national look at where we are, and a tale of two stories across the country. Eastern areas of the country, largely drought-free, as few smaller areas with lesser amounts of drought, whereas most of the western U.S. is in some form of drought with just a few pockets that are not covered by drought. Pockets of D4, we've had a little bit of recovery, but still lots of drought throughout the west and a decent chunk in our area. I believe about 44%, I think was the number we're looking at nationally for coverage. If we look more in our region, to give a little better view, National Weather Service Central Region, that just happens to cover the states that we address here. Again, most of the east clear, except for Iowa, parts of Wisconsin, Illinois, and then western Iowa to most of the western states have some level of drought with increasing levels and a little bit of D4 even down in the Colorado-Kansas border area. Over the last 4 weeks, kind of a story of how things have gone. The green areas from Missouri and Iowa arcing up around the Great Lakes, we've seen improvement with the additional precipitation. Whereas that dry area I noted from South Dakota down at the plains, we've seen worsening because of the lack of precipitation during a time of year when we expect to have a decent amount of precipitation. And then that's even shown in more severe changes if we go back 26 weeks, about 6 months ago. So that would put us at in November. We've seen a lot of improvement to the north and a lot of worsening in the plains. Because of coming out of major drought last year in the northern areas and the La Nina influenced dryness we've seen throughout the winter in the plains area. Okay, touching on agricultural impacts here. Something closer to home for me for things that we touch on a regular basis. First off, I mentioned colder temperatures. That has led to colder soil temperatures. And the colder temperatures have had a mixed impact. Some good, some bad overall. First off, we have some very cold soil temperatures still. This is a graphic from USDA Office of the Chief Economist showing average soil temperatures for the week of April 10th to the 16th. And the green areas, the light green areas on south are areas that are around 50 degrees Fahrenheit and warmer, where you could, if you get in the field, could start planting corn, soybeans, and that would be acceptable temperatures for them. Further north, colder soil temperatures, and then the blue areas further north, down in the 30s. We may have a few areas still that are not quite thawed, maybe parts of North Dakota. And then the cold temperatures have caused a little bit of refreezing at some levels further south. So the plains, we could start planting some small grains. They can handle colder temperatures and start. But largely what this is indicating is we're not getting a quick start to our planting season. We've reached crop insurance date where people can start to plant and be covered by crop insurance, and most producers want to get going as soon as they can. Appropriately, a number of them have held off because the cold soils and cold air temperatures have made that really not a smart thing to do, and most people have followed that. Touching on some of the specific crops, winter wheat. Our situation with winter wheat is not great right now. Kind of reviewing where we are, the condition rating maps from the bottom, the percent of good to excellent, lower left-hand side, percent poor to very poor, lower right-hand side. Lots of poor to very poor in most of our states, especially the plain states, which is our major winter wheat growing areas. In addition to conditions not being that great, winter wheat progress reaching heading is behind. Those colder temperatures have slowed that progress. Also, drier conditions probably have had a little bit of effect too in slowing that progress down. From an overall context, where we are with winter wheat, this is from Brad Rippey, USDA Office of the Chief Economist, putting together an index, a condition index across the U.S., shown on the bottom here of what percentage of area is covered by what ranking. So the red line here we are inside the box is 2022, which puts us second overall for second worst crop condition, winter wheat condition since 1996. There's a band of these here on the bottom compared to that we're kind of on the bottom of that bad band area with some wet conditions east, drier conditions west. That overall is putting us in our bad winter wheat situation. Some other crops, again, we're still kind of early, but touching on where we are, the corn, the percent planted in the upper left-hand side, there's been a little bit in the plains, a little bit over in Kentucky, some of the southern areas. We are not a long ways behind, but falling a little bit behind overall. Some spring wheat out, that is in northern areas of the plains, and again, can manage cooler conditions, and they've had some drier conditions to get that planted. Oats also go in earlier, percent planted, percent emerged. We've had some progress on oats, but a bit behind overall in those areas too. And one other graphic just to show kind of the problems related to this. One of the things that is reported in the weekly crop progress from NASS is estimates of the days suitable for field work. How many days can people be out working and doing something? And this is from last Sunday, ending the 17th. You see lots of 1 to 2 days, so a little bit of possible field work, some less than 1, and Minnesota at 0.1. The estimate of how much time people could be in the field. Conditions were not appropriate, so people are heeding this, but that is also slowing down some of the progress overall. Various other ag issues we talked about, delayed wetness in the east, and then some progress westward. It's been drier, but that's impacting crops there. Phenology has been a bit slower with colder conditions. And that's maybe a good thing because it has kept some perennials from reaching a point where they could be susceptible to freeze, some winter wheat, some tree fruits and things like that. Unfortunately, they have reached a point in some areas, maybe from parts of Missouri to southern Ohio. We have some impending very cold conditions coming next week that could do some damage if they have some sub-freezing temperatures, which is possible. We also have some weeds getting a start because of a lack of ability to get and apply for weed control. Last major issue, just touching on wildfire, obviously with lots of dry conditions in the west and the plains and windy conditions, fires have been a real problem. Just a quick image of fire and air quality status. Not much in the way of active fires in our region, some to the south and several to the west. Very warm or with dry conditions. We've had several red flag warnings, which that have been very frequent this year in parts of the west. The cooler, drier conditions has also delayed green up, delayed some vegetation from starting to green, which would also limit some of the fire starts. South Dakota, fortunately, noted their fire meteorologist noted that they have been lucky. They've had conditions appropriate, but they've had fewer starts, so a few fewer issues. Other states have had some major ones. Kansas, and I'll touch on one in Nebraska, got some detail from Al Dutcher and Nebraska Extension. There was a death that was not, it was someone fighting the fire. There was a collision and smoke from one of the, I think one of the fire chiefs. The winds were 50 to 60 miles per hour at the time. The fire was moving a mile every 5 minutes at its peak. 8 homes, 30 structures were lost. Center pivots, some producers were turning on center pivots to try to spray water on the fire. And unfortunately, the winds were blowing so quickly, it was not reaching the fire, just blowing away. And oddly, some pivots were damaged because the tires burned and then the pivots dropped and kinked some of the water lines. Also, lots of fence lines damaged that they're struggling to find materials to rebuild them. Okay, jumping onto the outlooks here. Again, touch on La Nina, 7-day to 14-day, and then the monthly and seasonal. Okay, alluded to this earlier. La Nina is still with us. We're talking about sea surface temperatures in the Pacific, and this shows what the likelihood is of that La Nina sticking with us. These are 3-month periods from the present out to, on the right-hand side, November, December, January. The blue bar is the probability of being in La Nina. The gray bar is probability of being neutral, and the red bar is probability of El Nino. So the probability of La Nina is the greatest, though only a little bit larger than the probability of being in neutral. So very likely we are not in El Nino going on. But this La Nina influence, it's important to us because there are some composite things or composites kind of expectations during the summer when we have a La Nina that are not very good. And anytime we are in an El Nino or La Nina, it improves our capability of talking about things coming up in the future with better certainty. We'll touch on those as we go along here. So next 7 days, what's the likelihood or how much precipitation? Pretty good chance of getting some precipitation from Iowa down to the southern plains. Up in the northern plains, we have another area of precipitation, but that one is largely associated with this snowfall event that is likely coming next week, where we have another potential for significant snows. This is probability of 8 inches of snow in this graphic. And you'll note that some of this area was on top of what was received in this last event. So they're coming off one blizzard and have another chance, not as significant, but plenty significant going ahead. Going ahead, and we have an incorrect graphic here on the temperature side. We'll remedy that here in just a second. I'll explain this here in just a second. So look at the right-hand side. Week 2 precipitation probabilities. Over in the eastern Corn Belt, eastern U.S., slight tilt towards the dry side. Northern plains, we have a slight tilt towards the wet side. Neither one of these terribly strong, but both of these would be more positive outcomes from our current situation. This temperature graphic is incorrect, but I'm going to jump ahead here. This is a risk hazard map for that same time period with a risk of colder than average temperatures from April 28th to May 5th. So if you can imagine, that this is the coldest area, this is what the outlook would look like, with better chances of colder conditions, eastern Corn Belt to the northern U.S., better chances of warmer in the southwest. That would be the correct graphic for the week 2. So there is some risk and chances for freeze in some of these areas, especially southern areas where perennials are farther along. Jumping ahead to May, so this is the outlook for temperature and precipitation for May. A very similar pattern with a slightly increased chance for colder temperatures from the northern plains to the Great Lakes. That would probably not be a good thing, especially from an agricultural perspective, because the cold conditions would, again, limit soils warming up and increase some of our chance for delays. The cold would be good for some of the snow areas and slowing the snow melt, allowing it a chance to enter the ground and limit some chances of flooding. Chances of flooding are not major, they would be more localized. On the right-hand side, we get back to, in May, better chance for precipitation east and a bit in the northern plains with some dry areas, central plains into Iowa. This is the start of what we're going to be seeing through the summer, which is concerning because this dry area is right on top of the driest areas that we've seen so far and some of the worst drought situations. This wetness would also continue to slow things in the eastern Corn Belt. May through July, again, continues a very La Nina looking flavor and also influenced by localized soil moisture conditions. Very good chances of warmer throughout the west, Kind of a mixed bag, not strong indications in the northern U.S., especially around the Great Lakes. That's going to change here in the next month's outlook. And then better chance of continuing dryness throughout the central plains. Again, bad situation, but possibly made worse, and still a better chance for above in the east. And then jump one more month as we go to June through August. So the main part of summer, this is what has us very concerned for a number of different reasons. Good likelihood of warmer throughout the whole western U.S. and the whole U.S. as whole, though part of the east, this probably is not very high. And then, a fairly large area of below average chances for precip for this time of year. Not usually as bullish, indicating these throughout the year. So throughout the plains, even extending into parts of the Midwest, we have below average chances for precipitation as we get into the growing season. So this is on top of already dry conditions. So this is why this has us very concerned from a crop perspective, from a water perspective, also from a fire perspective. We'll touch on that a bit more as we go along here. As expected, our drought outlook, what is likely to happen through July 31st, likely most of the area of the West staying in drought, with a possible increase in that area of dryness from South Dakota, arcing through Iowa, Missouri, and eastern Kansas. Maybe a little bit of improvement in North Dakota with some repeated chances for precipitation up there, maybe a little bit of improvement with some better monsoons into Arizona. Alluded to on the fire side, this is a chance of significant wildfire, May in the upper left-hand side, June in the right-hand side, July in the lower left. The areas that are covered in red have above normal chances for fire. You see as the summer goes along, what we would expect to see with drier, hotter conditions. Much of the plains and even getting into some of the mountains have an increased fire potential. And that is a risky situation because the firefighting potential in the U.S. is fairly finite. So if you have to spread the resources around to fight more fires, it's more difficult for them to control overall. So we expect this to be a problem as we go along through the summer. So overall, this same thing we've been talking about, wetter east, drier west, with some variations in between. Cooler recently, in much of 2022 overall, and our drought issues do persist in much of the plains. We have wetness and some cool soils are slowing the start of spring crop activity. We have fire problems in several areas of the plains and other drought issues. If we're looking ahead at the outlooks, La Nina is still likely to persist and influence the summer. That combined with soil moisture and some of the computer models are giving us a problematic outlook for much of our region as we get into the summer. There are some other influences that can influence us along the way, but that kind of offsets our background outlook as to what we expect to see. So looking ahead at May, a little bit cooler, more likely north, warmer to the south. Drier conditions generally continue in the central plains, and then they persist throughout the plains as the summer goes along, maybe even extending a bit more to the east of the plains, getting into parts of the Midwest, and pretty good chance of warmth overall throughout the western U.S. and extending into parts of the Midwest. So that fire potential does continue throughout the summer. So a bunch of links to a number of our partners and other places to find information, and lots of thank yous to folks who are involved in this call and others who contribute along the way. Thanks to everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you, Dennis. And that concludes our webinar for the day. Join us next month when Aaron Wilson from the Ohio Climate Office will be doing the presentation. Thanks, Dennis. ×2. Have a good day.